Hey, and welcome to Photographing Food, episode 2. So today we're going to talk about macro lenses. And I had a question from Winter, and she wrote down in the post earlier this week, when we announced that we're going live, when do you use a macro lens, and how can you compose when you're tight in with a macro? So we're just have to kind of like have a macro 101 session here, just so you guys know what we're talking about. Now, if you've never used a macro lens, with food photography, they're kind of like the lens you hear everybody say, oh, the 100mm macro or the 105mm macro is my favorite. Now, this is a 100mm macro lens right here. And most of the stuff I shoot is with this lens. And I'm gonna go into detail why I do that. But first, one thing I wanna go over with this lens is if you've got a cropped sensor on your camera, then this 100 is really going to act like 140 or maybe even close to 150 millimeters. So what you want to do is you want to get the 60 millimeter, because the 60 millimeter macro with the crop sensor is going to bring you close to this 100. It's something like 95 or 99, somewhere around there. Now that 60 millimeter will not fit on a full frame camera, so just keep that in mind. So if full frame, you want to go with the 100. If you have a crop sensor, you go with the 60. So with the macro, why I love it is because you can get down into like 1:1 and see the food kind of the size it is. And this is great when you're shooting a wide range of foods. Now, why would you want to go that close? So like when you're shooting people, it'd be kind of weird to have a shot of, an eyeball that's giant, or, your nose that's giant, or an ear. But most food that you shoot is much smaller than the human face. For instance, this cupcake, it's really small. It's smaller than the size of my hand. So a lot of times it's gonna feel really small in the frame, so you wanna get close into it. And with food, the colors and the textures and the details, you really do wanna have that close up view of it. So that's why going macro is a great way to go. So let's get started looking at a macro lens. Now I've got here the 100mm macro on my camera, and I've got a flash inside of a 47-inch softbox here. It's going to give me some nice soft lighting. So I'm going to take a picture and then I'll show you what we've got to start off. Okay, I've got a picture. Now let me bring it up on the screen for you. Okay, so you can see we've got our cupcake sitting here. We've got some nice lighting on it. Now, you may be thinking, okay, that's great, but it looks like I could do that with any other lens. Why the macro? Now, if we get closer and take the camera off the tripod and get really in close, I'm going to show you kind of why you would want to go macro. So the icing on this cupcake, it's got these really nice ridges. It's going to really pick up the light and pick up some highlights. So let's take a close-up shot of that. Okay, here we go. So you see how we're a lot closer with the macro there. And you may be asking yourself, okay, so what if I just get a really long lens and zoom in? Now, you could do that, but you're gonna hit a point where you're not gonna be able to get any closer. And that's because every lens has a minimum focal distance that you have to be away from the subject to have it in focus. And if you're curious to what it is, you can look on your lens, and if you notice, like below the focal ring, you'll see these numbers. And the top one, if you have Canon, it's going to be in green, and it tells you how many feet in the bottom is meters away you have to be. So for instance, the 85-1.8, you have to be 3 feet away. So you may be thinking, okay, I'll just get a 7200 and go into 200. Well, with the 7200, you have to be 4.6 feet away. And then with a macro, you can focus from under a foot away. So that macro is what allows you to get close enough to the food that you can really make it big and show up in your frame. So is there a food that doesn't look good with macro? I mean, personally, I think a macro can work great on any kind of food. Anytime you want to show off the detail of a dish, or if you just want to show off a certain portion of the dish, macro is a great way to go. And you probably see this a lot in magazines or recipes when they want to have room for copy on the side. So they'll go like a close-in macro shot, and then they'll have room for copy over here on the side. That's a great way to do. So I think what we're going to do now is we're just going to take a bunch of shots of these cupcakes and really kind of play around with the macro and see what we can do and what unique positions and angles we can get by having this ability to go in close. So let's take our camera here. Now, we did already one with this cupcake, and I've got an assortment of cupcakes over here. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to shoot them together, where we're going to have one in focus and then the rest are going to kind of go out of focus in the back. So I've got the cupcakes on this tray, and I'm going to pull this one, I think, to the front and put this one behind it. I've got my assortment of cupcakes on here. And then I'm going to kind of backlight it. So what that means is my flash is going to be behind here, the light's going to come off here, and I'm going to need to have some type of fill card or reflection to come back into it to bounce that light back in. So we're going to get our foam board here. Actually, I've got a smaller piece of foam board over here. And what's going to happen with this is the light's going to come off here, it's going to bounce and go in to fill in our shadows on our cupcakes. So let's take a picture here. Okay, so let's show what we got here. And now the exposure that we're using was from that previous one, so I think we're going to need to lighten it up a little. As you can see, it's a little dark there in the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump up the ISO a little bit because I like the aperture that I have. And then we're going to try and take a shot again. Okay, that was a little much, so I'm going to take it down just a little. Okay, one more. My flash didn't fire that time, so we're going to go one more kind of like that. Okay, so we'll show you this one. Okay, there you go. You can see we've got the nice backlighting on the back. And now I'm going to take another shot, and this time I really like these swirls that the cupcake has, and I want to do a shot where I can have the swirls on one side and then have some room for some copy and have some nice negative space because I have this white around it. So I'm going to shoot from overhead. Kind of like this. I think my exposure should be okay as the same. Something like that. I'm going to show it to you here. Okay, here we got the overhead looking down, and really, I'm not liking the looks of this, just the icing. I think the shot that's going to be best for these cupcakes is that we're going to have the cupcakes, because with the cupcake here, you've got the icing on here and then the front. So I'm going to shoot it from a head-on standpoint. So you're going to see the cupcake, the wrapper, and then the icing and the swirls like this. So to do that, I'm going to need to set up a background behind my set. So what I like to use is I like to use wooden boards like this here. So I'm going to put this behind there, and unfortunately you won't be able to see it, but I'll show you the pictures that are going to work. And you may be wondering, okay, how is this going to stay here? Well, similar to last week, I'm going to use the L brackets that you get at the hardware store and A clamps. So I'm going to take a clamp and put one underneath here. Got under my piece of marble, it'll fit right under, like that. And then I'm going to take a clamp and clamp it off. Go around over here. And then, just to be safe, I'm going to put another one on the back side, like that, go in the opposite direction, and this will help them stand up. So now what I've kind of created is this whole false wall scenario. So I've got this board, which is white, which is going to be my background, and then I'm going to have my subject in front of it. So I'm going to have my cupcake right here, and we're going to use some nice side lighting because I've got my subject right here, got it right here, and then I've got my light, and I'm going to shine it into the cupcake like that. So I'm going to take a picture and then we'll show it to you and see what you think. And I know that with this light, I want to bring some back in because I've got this dark icing. So I'm going to put this fill card attached to an A-clamp right here. And we're going to take a picture and see how it looks. And I'll show it to you here so you get an idea. This one is going to be too bright, so I'm going to need to lower the exposure a little because I brought the cupcake closer to the flash, increasing the exposure. So I'm going to make some adjustments to my ISO. But I want you to see the setup. So you can see a little, like that's way overexposed, but you get the idea of what we've got. So let's take the ISO down a little. And usually, you know, when you're shooting with a flash on manual like this, you'll have to, you know, take a couple test shots to kind of figure it out. Okay, that's much better. All right, I'm liking where this is going. And you know, when shooting food, don't be afraid to try stuff and it not work. Because the stuff I was trying before, you know, in my mind, I thought it was gonna look good, but it wasn't, you know, turn out to what I wanted it to look like. So this is more the direction I wanna go. Okay, you see this cupcake, you can see the, you know, the yellow cake, the wrapper, and you see this nice icing swirl that we've got. And you'll notice the white background I have, and that is coming from this wall right here. So I'm gonna take another one and I'm gonna get even closer. You know, we've got macron, so let's take advantage of it. All right, you can see we're in close like this. Okay, I know something else you may be thinking. Okay, Taylor, what if I just shoot further away and then just crop in so then I can get that look? Well, yes, you could do that, but the problem of getting in the habit of doing that is when you crop, you're literally just throwing pixels away. And when you do that, you're limiting the size of the image that you can print, which is a problem. Because what if a client or somebody you're shooting for says, hey, I love that shot that you took, but I want to make it, you know, on a billboard. I want to make it, you know, in a high print magazine or something like that, and the printer needs this resolution file. Well, if you've cropped in and just thrown away the pixels, you may not be able to do that for the final shot. So it can work in a pinch, but it's kind of a bad habit to get into as far as shooting just that way because you're limiting what you can do afterwards. All right, guys, do you have any questions at all? If you do, please leave some in the Facebook feed. Again, macro lenses, I like using them for all sorts of food photography because they allow you to get really close into the frame and you're not limited by having a focal length that's going to stop you from getting to where you need to go. And in case you're wondering, you know, maybe we should play around a little with this focal length so you can really see what I'm talking about. And if you've read issue 4 of Photographing Food, I go into great detail with this, testing about 5 lenses, seeing how close you can get and showing you macro. But let's play around with the 70-200 and see at 200 what we can get. So I've taken away my false wall. I'm going to put the 70-200 on. Like this. And now I'm going to go into 200 and I mean you can see like it'd be really cool if I could take a picture like that, but it's just not working. I'm way too close. So I'm going to back it up. Like it's not even, it's going trying to figure it out. So if I scoot back here, okay, this is seeing how close I can get? Okay, so you see I'm leaning all the way against the cabinet. And that's the closest I can get to the cupcake before it would pick up focus. Let's take a look here. You can see, yeah, that's a lot further away than the macro lens. So, you know, if you were only able to shoot your food being that far away, it could work for a lot of dishes, but if you're really wanting to take advantage of the textures and colors and the shape of the food, then you need to have that ability to get close in there. And a little bit more to Winter's question about how do you compose with this. I've kind of touched a little with a magazine, how they like to put text over here. So one thing you want to think about is what is the final crop dimensions or crop ratio of your image going to be? Is it going to be a square? Is it going to be a vertical rectangle? Is it going to be like a 16:9 ratio? Thinking about that ahead of time will allow you to shoot it in a frame that's going to work with whatever that final image is going to be. Because it'd be awful if you got close in, got all this detail, everything you wanted, and then when it went to the final crop, it didn't work. Like for some reason, you were missing part of the food that you wanted to showcase and it just didn't work. So it's good to know that ahead of time going into it. And with these cupcakes, I think we're going to play around and just do a couple more shots because I really like this icing swirl that we've got and the nice colors. I mean, not the nice textures with the swirl. So I'm going to take another cupcake and kind of put it behind. So this time, instead of having that false wall behind us, we're going to have another cupcake that we're going to go into. I'm going to switch back to the macro because you can see, just zooming in just doesn't quite get us what we want. Switch the lens here. And if you guys are curious at all about the gear I'm using and what I'm using to take these shots, if you go to photographingfood.com/live, I've got a list of the equipment that I've used. And I've also got where you can sign up to an email list that will notify you when I'm doing the next episode. I don't have a set schedule yet of if it's going to be every day. I mean, what day of the week it's going to be every week. But I am going to make them all at night, partly so I can show you what you can do with artificial lighting. And then also that's just kind of a time I think works for most people. But if you have any input or things you would like to see in future episodes, please send me a message either at taylor@photographingfood.com, or you can send me on Instagram a DM or send me a Facebook message. All right, so let's take another picture here. I liked before how we had the cupcake and then had that white background. So let's mess around and have another cupcake in the background. All right, let's take a look at it. So let's get to pull up here. Okay, so here you can see we've got the cupcake in the front, and then instead of having that white wall as the background, we've got another cupcake in the background there. And again, I'm using light to bounce back in. So guys, if you've got any questions, please put them below. I'm about to wrap up here because I think we've talked about the subject of macro and when we'd use it. Just one more recap. Macro lenses are amazing for food photography because they allow you to get really close in on your subject and show the textures and the details. With other type of photography like portraits or landscapes, you don't really necessarily want to show the detail of an eye or an eyeball or detail of an earlobe. But with food, seeing those details and seeing the intricacies of it really kind of entice your appetite. So that's why I love using it for food. I use it for probably 95% of my shots. I don't use it if I'm trying to do a wide, kind of overhead tablescape. So if you shoot a lot of shots like that, where you're showing a wide array of food, it's not going to be great for that. But if you're focusing on a single food item, single part of the plate, or highlighting certain individual aspects of the food, I highly consider you think about adding a macro lens to your light up. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me for episode 2 of Photographing Food Live. We'll be back next week for another episode. Again, send me an email, taylor@photographingfood.com, or sign up for our newsletter, photographingfood.com/live. You can see all the gear that we've used, and you can explore all these techniques I've brushed upon in detail in the Photographing Food PDF series. All right, we'll see you guys next week.